Now I'm talking about certain very important verbs that are tested in the paper. Verbs. There are numerical questions, there are narrative questions. Numerical questions in performance management includes verbs like calculate or derive. So normally we are very much familiar with the verb calculate. We need to work out a number. We need to work out, for example, it says calculate material price variance. So you just work out a number of adverse price variance. Or sometimes they use the word derive a demand function. That is the equation that you need to derive. So again, in that you know what to do. So you have to derive an equation or demand function. So now you think, okay, what I need to work out to derive this. So then you do a more in-depth, or I would say you think more, and you don't directly jump to the calculations. You think, okay, how to derive an equation. So this requires to work out the value of, for example, if P is equals to A minus BQ. So to derive this demand function, you know, I need to work out A, I need to work out the value of B. So in case of derive, I would say it's a bit more than the calculation part. You do calculate in that as well, but you think about the calculation and then you perform the calculation in relation to the verb derive. So as I said, derive demand function or price function. So you need to think, okay, first I need to come up to the calculation of A, then I need to work out B, that is gradient or slope, and then I can show the equation P is equals to A, whatever you have worked on, minus BQ. So yeah, in calculation or something to derive, you need to perform calculations, right? Second is estimate. Now this word estimate is used by the examiner when the answers cannot come accurate. When answers cannot come accurate is where you have to estimate, okay, like learning curves, okay. You know that we are using an estimated learning curve of 80% or 90% according to our prediction that 80% of the learning curve. So in that situation, we are estimating the results, and in estimation, the answer might not be accurate. So yeah, estimate is where the answer cannot be calculated with certainty, which is very much, you can say, in case of learning curves, you estimate the things. Plus in case of budgets, when we are estimating the cost, estimating the revenue. So you have seen in budgets, or the definition of budget says estimation of cost and revenues. So that is all prediction that you are doing, which might not be calculated with complete certainty because you are doing forecasting thing in that. So estimate is where answers cannot be calculated with certainty. Now for numerical questions like these, it's very important message for you people that you must understand the verbs. Yeah, for calculations, I would say it is not very high need to understand the exact meaning of the verbs, but for narrative ones, yes, you must know the meaning of that. So for calculations, these are the commonly tested verbs. Note, numerical questions requires a structured layout so that your calculations can be followed. Now this is one of the problems that we have seen. An examiner mentions this a lot in their reports and other documents, that students are not very much following the proper structured layout for an answer. So for that, you need to have a very complete clarity in relation to how to come to the answer. Like for example, if it's a question of linear programming, so you must know the steps of linear programming. You have to perform the steps step by step, like define variables, objective functions. Similarly, if it's a question of pricing, or I would say it's the question says to calculate the optimum quantity or the optimum price using MC is equal to MR approach, or I can say the algebraic approach. So you must know the steps of that. Now, what are the steps of algebraic approach? You need to first determine or derive the price function. Then you have to double the gradient. You have to double the gradient for MR. Then to replace MR with MC. Then to work out the optimum quantity and the price. So the point I want to make is that there are complaints by the examiner that students do use haphazard way of doing calculations via spreadsheet. So your manner of showing the answers should be logical, structured, proper stepwise, with proper cell references for the calculations that you have done. Yes, using spreadsheet, it's a big sin, as I always say, to use calculators. You cannot use calculators. So you have to use spreadsheet to maximum and with correct references of your calculations. So the proper structure layout is important. That again I will show you through my CRQ practice questions. So these are the numerical questions, important things. I hope this will help you out. Now the most interesting part comes. Yes, I know you people are looking forward to this. This is where massively people are struggling, and that is how to handle narrative CRQ theory. So for that, there are certain different verbs that are tested in the paper, and it is very important for you to understand the meanings of these separate verbs. Let me start first with describe. What describe means? So I will today try to give you a good clarity in relation to what exactly the verbs are, and I know you people want me to do this. Even if you will not speak right now, but this is somewhere in your heart because you are missing this information. If you have covered the paper before someone else, still I would feel like you're not clear about the exact meaning of the verbs. What describe is, so listen to me very carefully. Can you describe a person? When someone asks you to describe that person, how that person looks like, how Rizwan Maniya looks like. So in this, what is your explanation? You describe a person by telling he is tall, he is short, he is thinny, he is fat, he is fair, not fair. The features, his nose is like this, straight, pointed, upward. Eyes are big, small. Describe a person. So what do, you describe the features of that thing. You describe, okay, the person looks like this. It's not just a person, it could be any house. Describe any object. So when someone requires you to describe an object, so actually you have to describe how it looks like. What are the features of that? Understood? I'm sure you are understanding this very clearly. Similarly, if a question says you to describe suitable performance indicators, for example, suitable performance indicators. Now, if the question says you to describe suitable performance indicators for one of the balance scorecard perspective by the name of customer perspective. Now, what are you required to do here? Now, after giving you a practical daily life example, now I'm giving you an examination-based example, what examiner expect that to be. Describe a suitable measure for customer perspective. So what comes to your mind when I ask you any measure for customer perspective? Yes, please. Any good measures you can suggest? Quality is not a measure. That's wrong, Jatin. Number of claim is the right measure. Complaint rate is the right measure. Percentage of sales return is the right measure. Yes. So a measure is represented in form of a percentage or it is represented in form of number of something. I always tell students this. So, when you are describing a measure like number of repeat customers, if the question says suitable measure, so you said suitable measure is number of repeat customers. Now, if you just mentioned that number of repeat customer is a suitable measure, this means you haven't described that. In fact, you just listed that. I'm sure you are listening to me very carefully. It's a very important million-dollar discussion. So if you just mention number of repeat customer or percentage customer retention, so it is what you are listing down the measures. It's not describe. In describing the measure, you will actually tell how to calculate number of repeat customers. Understood? How to calculate that. Like we will calculate number of repeat customers by using information of total number of total customers who came back to the company, and we need information of the total customers. So we will work out a percentage like total customers who came back to the company as a percentage of the total customer. So you actually described a suitable indicator. In that, you first mention the name of that. And also the way to work out that. Understood? Way to work out that. So you just list down, you will not get complete marks assigned to this verb. Describe. I hope this is clear. Moving forward to the next one is interpret. Interpretation, we call this. Interpretation. Now what interpretation is? Interpretation means you have to explain. Interpretation of what you can say performance. You interpret the performance of the manager, which means in that interpretation you explain. You do that interpretation, but that you do in your own words. You do in your own words. So in interpretation, you explain something in your own words and you give your opinion about it. You give an opinion about it. So a lot of interpretations are required in terms of you explain in your own way. You give your opinions about that. Okay, you give your opinions about that, you explain in your own way. That is known as interpretation. It's a high-level verb, which means any verb which is a high-level verb, it will require application to be done according to the scenario. It will require link to be done with the scenario. It will be considered as an application-based questions. I always say, students, that there are two types of questions that can come in the paper. One is known as knowledge-based questions that requires simple book information, notes information, core concept about that thing. That is knowledge-based question. But if a question is an application-based question, this requires you to link that with the case study, link with the scenario, link with the case. So any verb which is a high-level verb like interpretation requires you to explain that thing in your own word by linking with the scenario and give your opinions about it. Okay, so that is interpretation, where you explain anything in your own words and you give your opinion that okay, this should be done like this should be done like this. Correct? So that's high-level verb, interpretation. Third, outline. Very simple. A low-level verb should be fairly brief. Well organized. Outline the key stages of budgetary control system, for example. So you just have to outline those. That's it. With a simple, brief information about this is step number 1, this is step number 2, this is step number 3. Outline the 3 steps of zero-based budgeting. So what you have to do, you have to mention step number 1 of zero-based budget, step number 2 of zero-based budget, step number 3 of zero-based budget. Okay. So that is simple outline. It should be brief. The marks will be low, and you simple have to explain the basic steps of that, mention the basic steps of that. And as I said, because it's a low level verb, so I would more think that this would be very much related to knowledge based question. However, interpretation would be more application based question, whereas outline would be more towards knowledge based question. Okay? So I hope you are getting and learning these differences. Similarly, if I move ahead, so then comes identify. Normally, you don't see identify coming alone. It's like identify and explain, right? So there are two verbs that are tested in one question, where you have to identify and explain that as well, okay? But let's be specific here, what exactly the verb identify itself means. Identify means just pick up a point and tell, okay, this is the thing. Like, for example, identify relationship between demand and price. So you would say the relationship between demand and price is an inverse relationship. Now, in identification, you just have to identify, okay, the relationship between demand and price is an inverse relation. That's it. Your identification is done. So it is more a knowledge-based thing rather than a skill, okay? But if a question says identify and explain the relationship between price and demand, so you will first identify the relationship. And what is the identification? That is, the relationship between price and demand is an inverse one. That's the identification. And then you explain why is relationship of that type, why the relationship inverse one, okay? So that is where you basically do one thing, and that is you identify, okay, this is the point, and then you explain that as well. But keeping identify as a separate aspect, you simply just tell, okay, this is the relationship, that's it. So you just have to identify it. Done. Okay? So it's a very low level verb, very less work to be done. Discuss is very much common in a performance management paper, where you have to cover both sides of the perspectives. As I said, both sides of the perspective, I mean to say the positive side is what you have to discuss, the negative side is what you have to discuss. So you have to basically give your own thoughts in relation to what are the positives in relation to this, with supporting facts. Yeah, with supporting facts. So cover both sides of the argument, positive angles of certain thing, negative angles of certain thing. For example, discuss the usability of, for example, zero-based budget for XYZ company. Now, it's a high-level verb. It's a high-level verb because the verb is discuss the usability. Usability is the object, okay? I will teach you what objects are later on. So verb is discuss, and what to discuss, the element or the object is usability, okay? So discuss the usability of zero-based budget for XYZ company clearly means that it requires massive application. It requires link with the scenario. It simply means what you have to done, you have to come up with the positive points, okay, for using zero-based budget. These are the positive things for that XYZ company, and these are the negative things that could happen for XYZ company. So you look and consider the positive aspects as well as the negative aspects of that subject matter, and then you can come up, okay, is this usable for the company or this is not usable for the company. So in case of discuss your own thoughts, you look at both sides of the argument, and you use your own thoughts with support of the scenario. As I said, link with the scenario, and this is a high level verb as far as your examination is concerned. So looking at the both side of the angle and discussing that, okay? When I say positive, so mainly I'm giving you a hint of advantages side, but those that are scenario based, not a simple list of advantages, okay? When I say negative side, so I mean to say drawbacks, of that particular technique, but again that should be scenario based drawbacks. You can't come up with a general list of drawbacks. After this is explain. Explain the term activity-based costing, explain what activity-based costing is, explain activity-based costing, explain zero-based budget, explain incremental budget. When it comes to explain, so you explain the technique. You define, you use the definition of that, you explain the technique, that is explanation. Similarly, if the question says explain the advantages of zero-based budget. So here you cannot just state the advantages. You will not just state, okay, time consuming activity zero-based budget. This is not enough. If the question says explain the drawbacks of zero-based budget, drawbacks. So to explain the drawbacks, right? Now you cannot just mention point number 1, zero-based budget is a time-consuming activity. If you think you will get marks for that, you are wrong. Because the verb is to explain. So this means whatever you explain, you need to have a reason for that. You need to tell why it is rather just stating it. So you cannot just state, okay, zero-based budget is a time-consuming activity. You will not get marks. The marker will not give you good marks in that case because the marker required you to explain here. So now you have to tell why zero-based budget being time-consuming is a drawback, and this is what you will explain by mentioning that in case of zero-based budget, or I can start like this. Zero-based budget is a time-consuming activity. That's not explanation. That is just what you've stated right now. But you will continue later on. Zero-based budget is a time-consuming activity because it requires construction of different decision packages. So each manager prepares their own package. Then these are given to the top management of the board, who will then evaluate and rank the each package, and then they will allocate the funds according to that. So now this is the explanation. Stating means drawback is time-consuming activity, but going one step ahead, why this is time-consuming, this is what you have to mention to grab complete marks under the heading of explanation. So I'm telling you a very clear difference. Go with more explanation by thinking about the reason why I'm writing this, why this is a drawback, why this is an advantage. Understood? So that's for explanation. Moving towards suggestion, a very simple verb, suggest. What should I do? Should I do ACCA? Should I do CA? Okay, do ACCA. That's it. Suggest, should I give PM or FM? Give PM. That's it. So remember, when you are asked to suggest, it's for sure there will be more than one answers. Okay? More than one answers when you are required to suggest. Because the examiner required suggestion and every student will give different suggestion. So as far as the suggestion is relevant according to the situation, no matter it is different, so that is okay. Your suggestion could be different to the examiner's suggestion. Your suggestion could be different to your friend's suggestion. Not an issue. You need to suggest. That could be different, but I am saying it should be related to the scenario. So suggestion is a simple verb where someone asks you, suggest the measures. So in that case, you have to suggest the measures like percentage, number of repeat customers could be a measure for this thing, number of complaints could be a measure for this thing. That's suggestion. But when they say suggest with justification, wow, that is where the level and the intensity increases. As I said, they say suggest the measure, you said number of repeat customers. But if they say suggest and justify the measure, suggest and justify the measure, so now the second verb requires you to tell why this measure is one that you are suggesting here. Tell the reason why are you suggesting here. So in suggestion, you need to tell the reader why a particular answer or position makes sense. For example, justify the usage of throughput accounting. So I'll say, hello, throughput accounting is a technique that will help us to maximize the use of bottlenecks. Now, maximizing the use of bottlenecks, maximizing the usage of bottlenecks is a very valid reason for using throughput accounting. This gives reader the clarity, oh, if I use throughput accounting, I can take maximum benefit from the limiting factor. That's a justification. That's a reasoning that will give the clarity why are you suggesting throughput accounting. Similarly, as I said, if the question says suggest and justify a suitable measure, so now you have to suggest a measure. So the suggestion is percentage of repeat customers, but then you have to justify why are you suggesting this. So you can say here a company needs to ensure customer satisfaction, to ensure whether customers are happy or not, to check whether customers are happy or not. So this measure, which is percentage of customer retention, will simply indicate their satisfaction. If they are coming back to the company again, if they are coming back to the business again, which means they are happy, which means they are satisfied. So that is where you can give a valid reasoning what you have mentioned here. So in justification, you have to prove yourself. You have to prove through a reason. You have to prove through a reason why actually are you justifying that particular thing. So in suggestion, you just mention the measure. In justification, you have to prove it why, and you have to prove that through a reason that makes sense in that particular situation. So I'm sure you understood that percentage customer retention will help us to ensure customer satisfaction. As the customers comes to the business again, the repetition will give us the sign of satisfaction. That's justification. So I hope this is clear again. Similarly, coming to the last one is compare. Compare activity-based costing with absorption costing. So in comparison, we discuss the similarities between the two techniques, two or more things, and draw the conclusions. So if the question says compare the cost per unit calculated using absorption costing with ABC costing, so in that comparison of the costing, you would say, okay, the overheads are same for both, but the difference is coming where they are going to use the cost drivers. So one breaks the overhead into cost pools, the other doesn't break the overhead into cost pools. The one that breaks the overhead into cost pools identify the separate cost drivers, whereas the one that doesn't break them into cost pools will absorb on the basis of production related activity levels. ABC costing uses production and non-production related activity levels, whereas absorption costing uses just production related activity levels. So when you are required to compare, so you compare their features one by one. Compare their features one by one to say, this is how it is done using absorption, this is how it is done using ABC. This is how it is done absorption, this is how it is done using ABC. So you compare the features one by one, and that will satisfy the need of this verb comparison. So guys, do watch the video again, do watch this part again, try to understand this very well so that you get a lot of clarity in this one. I've explained this just for you people because I have seen students are struggling, because normally what people believe, simple, they think that justify, compare, suggest, briefly discuss all means the same, and the only thing that is in your mind is whatever we know, we have to write that. So it's not that what you know you have to write, it is what your examiner wants you to write, you have to write that. Another thing, in note it says narrative questions are a one way to break the requirements into verbs and objects. Break the requirement into verbs and objects. Verbs we have discussed in a very detailed way. Objects is what I will discuss when I move towards narrative questions more. So I'll explain what objects are. separate heading when answering each object. For example, if there are 2 objects or 3 objects in the paper, so the best way to ensure that you don't miss out any object, use separate headings, and under the headings, write about those separate objects. A quick example I need to give here. If a question says, for example, discuss the verb problems of rolling budgets. So discussion needs to be done for the problems of rolling budget. So my first heading would be problems of rolling budgets, and under this I will discuss the problem rolling budgets. Right. Now the question says discuss the problems of rolling budget. So problem is the first object. Then the question says and justify alternative approach. So my second verb is what? Justify. I have to give a reason, whatever I'm justifying. I have to give a reason for my alternative approach. So now I will make another heading using the second object, and that is alternative approach. Alternative approach will be my second heading. So try to understand. One object is problem, separate heading. Second object is alternative approach, second heading. This is giving me a clarity that I'm covering both the objects. So there were 2 verbs, discuss, problems, done. First heading. Second, justify alternative approach, done by the second heading. So the more number of objects you see here, you make headings for that. This will ensure you first that you don't miss out the objects, will ensure examiner that they can see you have covered all the objects in one question, in one part, in one requirement. So that will help you to manage the answer. I will show the demonstration of that as well. Then each paragraph should make one clear point. You can explain one point in one paragraph under one heading, which means problems. Under the heading of problems, there could be 3 paragraphs. You can discuss 3 problems in 3 separate paragraphs. Problem 1, problem 2, problem 3. So under this heading of problem, you can make 3 paragraphs. 1 paragraph for problem 1, 1 paragraph for problem 2, 1 paragraph for problem 3. That's it, the drafting done. Similarly, if you have to give 2 alternatives, for example, 2 alternatives of any alternative approach. So 1 paragraph for one alternative approach, another paragraph for another alternative approach. So under the heading of alternative approach, 1 para for one approach, second para for second approach. So this should be the drafting part. Heading with the number of paragraphs that are coming under the heading is what you have to follow in your narrative answers. I'm again and again saying that I will show you how I'll do drafting based on the principles that I've just mentioned. Do remember these points, and when I will demonstrate, it will give you further clarity. I hope you all are getting my point and understanding this very important discussion that we are doing for performance management, and not just for performance management. It will help you in taxation, it will help you in FM and everywhere. So I hope this is clear to all of you friends.